Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. And just as by way of introduction, if you picked up a copy of the agenda over on the table, you'll see that we've actually the meeting's been partially conducted already. We had an executive session, and it was significant, and we needed to have several participants participate via Zoom, so we got that taken care of. So now we are actually at item F. And before we go any further, initially at the very beginning of the meeting, we made several changes in the agenda. So I will call those to your attention. Under presentations, items H2 and H3 are switched. So we will do the special tax district feasibility study update before we do the presentation and discussion on natural medicine. And then we will also take what we think will be a short piece of business. Item I1, considering appointing Matthew Rose to the Historic Preservation Commission. We'll take that after we do the consent calendar. So we got the items, the content and discussion will of course be the same. It's just the order that items are presented in. So with that, we are now at public comment on non-agenda items. This is a time when anyone in the audience is welcome to speak for up to 3 minutes. And this would be anything that is not on the agenda. I have one individual who has a non-agenda item. That would be Sally Fitzgerald. You want to speak to the tree canopy? Sally, if you'd come forward. You have 3 minutes. We need your name and address. And it's council's practice not to respond to any comments, but we do have your contact information. So, Sally, good evening. Oh, Sally, okay, yeah. And if you'd be about three inches or so away from the microphone, that seems to work pretty well.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, yes. My name is Sally Fitzgerald. I live at 143 Deer Path in town. And I would like to know information, I know I can't have it today, about the tree study, canopy study. We were supposed to have it in the spring and we wanted to wait. The trees were in full bloom. And I'm just wondering if it's been done and if it's going to be done. My other question is, why are there more big trees being taken down? And I'm concerned about the trees. They're older than all of us put together. And that's my speech for the night.
Okay.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Sally. Okay. I will note that I do have a request from Joan Stang to speak, but that'll be during the speed camera issue, which will be later on. I think that's towards the end of the meeting. I also have 2 emails that we received that I will read, but if there's anyone else who would like to speak to something not on the agenda, now we'll let people who actually came down to the council meeting speak. Is there anyone else who wants to talk about any non-agenda items? Okay. All right. With that then, 2 emails people asked to have presented tonight. One is from Peter Summers, 724 Duclos Avenue, Manitou Springs. Good evening, council. I am writing to once again advocate for the extension of bus route 36 into a year-round service for all residents of Manitou Springs. I believe this is an important service that I used often, and my wife had used to get easier from the pool and back home when it had been open. Looking ahead to your budget session, I implore you to consider this service extension, both for the Dillon Mobility Hub connectivity and your fellow Manitoites. P.S. I haven't seen any kind of plans for the hub, but if possible, I'd love to see a pedestrian bridge linking the back of the Dillon to Fields Park. Peter Summers. And then we have another comment from Rebecca Monahan, 147 Crystal Park Road, Manitou Springs. I just want to thank you for supporting the speed measures on Crystal Park Road. I'm on the lower end and get the fast traffic coming down while many deer eat at my driveway and cross my creek area, as well as turkeys, etc. Too many times it's a close call with fawns that makes me cringe. The new hump study is greatly appreciated. I just wish there were one just above me near Sutherland. I'm sure there will be complaining about this. They should try living here and seeing the many huge commercial work trucks coming barreling past every day. They don't care that we are a neighborhood. Please continue to support the speed control. Thank you, Becky Monahan. Okay. And so with that, we will conclude the public comment on non-agenda items portion, and we will push on to our consent calendar. We have 5 items. First is approval of the September 17th, 2024 City Council regular meeting minutes. The second, requesting approval of the general services agreement with Timberline Building Systems LLC for the Soda Springs Park Phase 2 playground construction. The third item is requesting approval of the general services agreement with Finlac Construction for the 2024 water treatment plant improvements. The fourth, consider appointing Pamela Smith to the Mobility and Parking Board as an alternate member. And fifth, Art on the Avenue review and authorization. And all this, of course, was included in the city council packet and is available to the public online. So with that, any member of council can ask to have an item taken off and discussed separately, or barring that, I would seek a motion to approve and to accept and approve this consent calendar as presented.
I move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
I second.
Motion is second. Let's vote.
And motion carries unanimously.
Very good, thank you. And so now this will be the first item that we transposed. This will be consider appointing Matthew Rose to the Historic Preservation Commission as a regular member. Is Mr. Rose here tonight? Yeah, council, would you like to have him come forward? Mr. Rose, would you like to come forward and speak to us? And for the benefit of the audience, he submitted a letter of interest and an application to be on the Historic Preservation Commission. Mr. Rose, if you could just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and your motivation.
Sure. I'm a Manitou resident. I live at 164A Clarksley Road. My wife and I moved here from Chicago about a year ago, but we've been coming to Manitou Springs for a long time. My wife's family lived here, and so we started coming here in the 80s. And so we've seen a lot of change and some nice things that haven't changed. So once we moved here, I started realizing, there's a lot of change happening that I see. We started attending the city council meetings, and I heard you guys deliberating over a few things, and one in particular concerned the Historic Preservation Commission. And I thought that might be a place where I could get involved. I come from a background of, I'm an interior designer. I work for an architect. I spent a lot of the last few years designing retail spaces, going to small towns all over the country, and presenting to planning commissions, trying to fit the design that my client wanted into the prescribed building design regulations. So it seemed like something I have a lot of knowledge about from one side, but I could bring that to the other side and try to help Manitou preserve what we have here, as well as grow and develop. So that's sort of what moved me to reach out when I saw that there were a couple of spots open on the commission.
Great, thank you. Council, do you have any questions or comments? If not, I would seek a motion.
I move approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so the motion is to appoint Matthew Rose to the Historic Preservation Commission as a regular member. Any
Thank
further
you.
discussion?
Just thank you for volunteering to serve. That's great when we have residents and citizens step up to the plate and help us out on stuff. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm excited about it.
Great. Let's vote.
And motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you. Matthew, you didn't even get a chance to get back to your chair, so I guess this portends time on the HPC doing a lot of work, so you won't be sitting much, perhaps. Okay, anyway, thanks very much. We appreciate you. As Nancy said, we appreciate you stepping up. Great. Okay, so that takes us to item H1, proclamation number 0724, a proclamation recognizing October as Community Planning Month. And our council liaison to the Planning Commission, Julie Wolf, will read that proclamation.
Whereas change is constant and affects all cities, towns, suburbs, counties, boroughs, townships, rural areas, and other places. And whereas planners can help navigate this change with data-driven insights and expertise that provide better choices for how people work and live. And whereas community planning provides an opportunity for all residents to be meaningfully involved in making choices that determine the future of their community. And whereas the full benefits of planning require public elected and appointed officials who understand, support, and demand excellence in planning and plan implementation. And whereas the month of October is designated as National Community Planning Month throughout the United States of America and its territories. And whereas the American Planning Association endorses National Community Planning Month as an opportunity to highlight how planning is essential to every community and how planners are uniquely positioned to identify solutions to communities' most difficult housing, transportation, and land use questions. And whereas the celebration of National Community Planning Month gives us the opportunity to publicly recognize the participation and dedication of the members of the Manitou Springs City Planning Commission who have contributed their time and expertise to the improvement of the city. And whereas we recognize the many valuable contributions made by the professional community and regional planners in the city of Manitou Springs and extend our heartfelt thanks for the continued commitment to public service by these professionals. Whereas we also recognize the city planners, those residents in the Manitou Springs, in the city of Manitou Springs who volunteer their valuable time contributing to the planning process on task forces and working groups, including the current Plan Manitou 2.0 working group members who have contributed their unique and important perspective for the betterment of the city. Now therefore be it resolved that the month of October 2024 is hereby designated as Community Planning Month in the city of Manitou Springs in conjunction with the celebration of National Community Planning Month, adopted this first day of October 2024 in the city of Manitou Springs, El Paso County, Colorado, United States of America, planet Earth.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Appreciate you reading that. Thank you. And we have our planning director, Fred Rolandhagen here. Fred, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yes, Mayor, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for the proclamation. Appreciate it. And the planners in the professional community here in Manitou Springs provided a wealth of information for this city, but also this city wouldn't be what it would be if it weren't for our volunteers, the volunteer planners, the volunteers who participate in a number of different ways to better this community. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. If you'll stay there just a second. Council, anyone care to make a comment? Well, Fred, it's a lot of work and we appreciate what you and your staff do. Looking into the future is not an easy job and trying to figure out what we did in the past is not easy either. So thanks much.
Thank you.
Great. Oops, okay. Yeah, so next item is our special tax district feasibility study update. Denise, let's see, did you want to introduce this?
No, I'll turn it over to Chelsea and I don't know if Leslie's here, but I just saw that Farley walked out, but I'll turn it over to Chelsea.
Thank you. Chelsea Royston for the record. So I will do a brief presentation and then turn it over to our consultants who are here to do a full presentation of their findings. And then I'd like to come back. I don't want to spoil the ending for you all is my main goal here. But as you're all aware, over the last year and a half or so, there has been a steering committee that has been working with our consultants, economic planning systems to to evaluate and find a path forward to consolidate and renew our taxing districts in Manitou Springs, which sometimes overlap, sometimes have gaps, sometimes don't provide enough revenue to maintain the services that they were charged with. And so our consultants have done a great analysis of several different funding mechanisms and different proposed districts, expanded districts, all with the goal of creating funding that can serve gateway to gateway along Manitou Avenue in our commercial corridor. So overall, those services were identified as trash removal, holiday lighting, power washing sidewalks, sidewalk snow removal, landscaping, and for certain entities, it also included marketing and events planning and things like that. So with those services identified, we excuse me, I'm actually going to turn it over to our consultants now. I will grab a drink of water and I will come back refreshed. But they will walk you through all of the identified alternatives, and then I'll come back and we can discuss a little bit more about where we go from here. Thank you.
I think before we get started here, just for the benefit of the audience, and it probably is a reminder to council, is this is sort of an update. So this is largely informational. Council, I think we will be asked to, we are being asked to provide some direction. We'll see various options here, and I think we want to winnow that the options down and provide a little more direction so that we'll continue to make progress on this. Okay, gentlemen, if you'd introduce yourselves, please.
So, Mayor, members of council, my name's Dan Guimond.
Sir, can you move the microphone usually about 3 inches between the microphone and your mouth?
Is that
seems
good?
to work well. Is that okay with council? Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
We okay?
We good?
Maybe a little closer still?
Okay. Can you hear me better now? Okay, great.
I think so,
Sorry.
yeah. Go ahead, okay.
Okay, again, Mayor, members of council, my name is Dan Guimond. I'm a principal with Economic and Planning Systems, EPS for short. With me is Christian Carroll, an associate with EPS, and we were the principal authors of this study. And I'll go through about 20 slides here. I'll try and move it along very quickly so we don't get bogged down, but feel free to interrupt if you have a specific question. But as Chelsea mentioned, I believe we've set aside time for discussion at the end of the presentation. So just go ahead. So just an overview of the project in terms of the background and scope. We go into existing district conditions in the city and then look at the taxing district options that are available to the city in terms of meeting the goals and objectives of the project RFP that we responded to. And then we evaluated some specific scenarios or alternatives in terms of the various district options and various levels of funding, and then make some recommendations regarding next steps. So background. It's change. Oh, it's just pretty, I guess it's pretty slow to change here.
I'm clicking, but it takes about 10-15 seconds.
It seems to be very slow.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
all right. That might be better because it seems to be very slow. In terms of background, historical context, the city has 3 separate taxing districts at this point in time that we looked at: the Business Improvement District, the Metropolitan Parking District, or Metro for short, and the Urban Renewal Authority. The study's purpose specifically outlined again in the RFP, just noting, as Chelsea mentioned, that the existing districts are outdated and not generating sufficient revenues for their intended purpose. There's a lack of continuity or contiguous nature, and there are portions of the commercial corridor that are not covered. And then specific to the Urban Renewal Authority, it is scheduled to expire, at least the East End Urban Renewal Plan area is scheduled to expire in 2031. So there's some, there's some time, but it's coming up towards its dissolution. In terms of the goals of the project, we were asked to explore options for creating a district that unifies the corridor gateway to gateway to mitigate existing boundary issues and conflicts, to create a funding mechanism for maintenance, marketing, and promotional activities, and to allow for the expected or proposed implementation of an overall downtown development plan in the near future. So next slide, please. So you can see on the map in salmon color on the left that's the bid in the red outline. The parking district, the Metro district, is underlying it and is slightly bigger than the bid. The gray areas to the west of downtown and to the east of downtown are what we are referring to in this study as the gap areas that are not under any existing districts. And the far east area is the East End Urban Renewal Area. Next slide. So the bid was formed in 2004 and provides maintenance, marketing activities in the Central Business District. The parking district was created in 1989, excuse me, and was formed to provide downtown parking, first by acquiring the former Wichita Motel property for a parking lot, and then later acquiring the Shemiski property for an additional parking lot. The Urban Renewal Authority was formed in 2006, at which time the East End Urban Renewal Plan area was created. And then I mentioned the 2 gap areas in between. Next slide. So the bid basically covers 103 parcels of 93 businesses. Its current budget is about $65,000, of which the primary revenue source is a 30 cents per square foot assessment on commercial property that generates about $55,000 a year. There's a modest amount of additional funding from MAP coupon sales. In terms of expenditures, the largest expenditures at this point in time is maintenance, which is about $41,000 or 64% of the total budget. Maintenance costs have been increasing over time, over the years. Revenues have not been increasing very quickly because you've got a flat assessment fee that hasn't been increased since, I believe, since it was instituted originally. It may have increased at some point in time, but it hasn't been increased for a long time. And the bid is wanting or needing additional funding, more for marketing and economic development, promotions, events, types of activity, because what's happened over time is their budget hasn't increased that much, but their responsibilities and the amount of money going to maintenance has taken a larger and larger portion of the budget. It was originally about a 50-50 split between maintenance and then other marketing beautification activities. And now, as I said, maintenance activities have taken a much larger portion of the budget. Next slide. The Metro Parking District is bigger, but not substantially bigger than the bid. It covers generally the same area. Its revenues currently are primarily from parking revenues and as well as fines and tickets. It's about $280,000 a year. There is a very minor, minimal property tax on downtown property owners of 0.44 mils, which raises a little less than $5,000 a year. So it's 98% coming from parking operations. The expenses are primarily for running the parking lots, and most of the money is basically allocated to a contract with city parking services to operate the parking lots. Next slide. This isn't really in the context of our study, but the city parking and mobility provides, in addition to what Metro District provides in terms of those two parking lots and those operations, the city manages the city's parking and mobility department and manages on-street parking, 414 on-street spaces, and as well as some other parking lots in the downtown area that are not as well located in terms of the commercial district, but do provide a big piece of the parking. I think of significance is the city's parking operations are significantly larger with total revenues of almost $4 million a year. Next slide. The Urban Renewal Authority is as shown on the map at the east end of the city. It has its primary funding source is tax increment financing, which means that they get the incremental property taxes from the growth of development within the district over time. They get the incremental property taxes from the city, but also from all of the other taxing entities. Current revenues in the 2023 budget were $131,000. The city can also allocate the local sales tax from the district to the URA and has done that in some years, but hasn't done that over the last couple of years. But if the sales taxes are allocated as was requested in the 2024 budget, that would add another $153,000 to the budget. Expenses are primarily grants and cost reimbursements for development projects as well as capital improvements in that portion of the city. And I think one of the needs is looking ahead is how ongoing maintenance and upkeep are going to be handled in that portion of the city when the URA sunsets. Next. The gap areas I mentioned, the West Gap area is to the west of the bid from Ruxton to the Serpentine Road roundabout, about 34 additional parcels. The city has made a number of improvements in that area, including sidewalk widening, underground utilities, and flower gardens. But there's no specific provision for ongoing maintenance beyond what the city does within the right of way. The East Gap area is really that larger area from about where we are here today to the URA boundary. 71 parcels, includes a number of the larger hotels in town, as well as undeveloped land along Fountain Creek. This area is in need of a significant capital improvements. As opposed to the other areas of town, the utilities are still above grade. There are narrow sidewalks, a lot of curb cuts, and a lack of beautification improvements. And there are no provisions for maintenance beyond what the city does in the right of way. So next. So we looked at what the potential alternative tax district options would be that are available to the city. The first is a downtown development authority, which is a quasi-public downtown improvement agency. It can fund and build capital improvements and provide downtown maintenance services. It can also utilize tax increment financing or TIF for up to 30 years. And it has the ability to levy a property tax assessment of up to 5 mils per year. The second is a general improvement district, which is a city-initiated special improvement district. It's generally done for capital improvements like roads, utilities, parking, pedestrian, stormwater, etc. It can also fund and pay for operations and maintenance, and it can levy either a property tax or an assessment. The third is to look at, it would be to expand the existing business improvement district to cover the areas that are not currently covered in the city. And the bid, of course, has the ability to develop and operate public improvements, to provide maintenance, clean and safe type functions to the city, maintenance, marketing, promotion, and economic development services. And it could also either levy an assessment or a mill levy. And one advantage of a bid is those tax rates or assessment rates can vary by zone in the city if you set up separate sub areas or separate zones. Next. So we were asked to look at some other communities, some peer communities, to see how they're structured, how they function, their downtown management and operations. Colorado Springs obviously is not a peer in terms of its size, but it has what I think is a somewhat similar district structure, although it's a little more, it's certainly more integrated than current structure is here. There is a overall 501c4 economic development corporation that is kind of the umbrella of the organization. They have a bid that covers the central area of the downtown, 32 blocks, that has a 5 mil levy. And they also have a downtown development authority that covers a much larger area of the city. You can see on that map, you're looking at your screens, you can see on the larger map is the DDA area, about 7 sub-districts, 1 square mile. And it has a 5 mil levy as well. So the properties that are in the bid and in the DDA are paying 10 mils. And as I mentioned, a DDA also has tax increment financing power. So they do collect TIF for doing redevelopment projects and also provide gap financing on some projects. We also looked at Golden, which has a DDA as its primary downtown development tool. Interestingly enough, their DDA was created in 2014 to replace the Downtown Urban Renewal Authority, which sunsetted at that point in time. They also have a general improvement district that they use to operate downtown parking. And then the third downtown we profiled was Littleton. It's the newest downtown development authority in the state that was created a couple of years ago. It has 4 sub areas, and they're just kind of really getting started. They have authorized a 3 mil levy, but the city has chosen in this first year of funding to use ARPA funds to basically pay for the annual budget for the first year. But in next year, the 3 mil levy will go into effect. So next slide, please. So we looked at a number of sort of preliminary alternatives in terms of trying to get some, evaluate their advantages and disadvantages and get some feedback from the steering committee we were working with. So alternative one was to look at a new or expanded BID to replace the current bid. The advantages, as I think I already mentioned, the assessment can be varied by zone. The zones don't need to be contiguous, but no, they do need to be contiguous. I'm sorry, with the bid. And the disadvantages are the bid doesn't have TIF, tax increment financing power, so it wouldn't replace the URA function I mentioned. The second would be to create a new downtown development authority, potentially to replace the bid, as well as potentially also to replace the URA. The advantages is it covers that it can pay for and cover both operations and capital improvements. It could use a mill levy up to 5 mills, can use tax increment, and they can contract with the city for other unfunded services. The disadvantages, as it relates to the existing bid in particular, is it has a 5 mil levy cap in terms of paying for ongoing operations, and that actually in the downtown area would generate less money than the bid is generating with their 30-cent assessment. The third is a combination of a DDA and a bid, sort of pretty much along the lines of the Colorado Springs structure that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. The bid would provide operational services. The DDA would focus more on capital projects and development financing. The bid would in this alternative charge a mill levy, could charge a mill levy or an assessment. The DDA would capture TIF and could charge up to 5 mills. The disadvantages this could, as I mentioned in the Colorado Springs example, some properties would end up paying for two different assessments. And then we looked separately really at consolidating parking options between the metro and the city as an option, and using a JID or either using a JID or using dissolving the metro and having the city take over those operations. So those are the preliminary options we looked at. In terms of next slide, please. In terms of stakeholder feedback, and this is steering committee members, a couple of council people that we interacted with, as well as staff, and as well as the boards of the bid and the metro. There's we haven't done extensive. This is more of a technical study. We haven't done extensive process related input from all of the organizations, but in terms of the input we did receive, there's a desire in the bid area to increase the bid budget, as I think I mentioned earlier, as the maintenance costs have increased faster than revenues, and there's a lack of money for other services. The bid owners have expressed some interest in increasing services. It's unclear how much they would be willing to pay. There's some support for in the commercial corridor and in the city for expanding the tax district boundaries to cover those gap areas that I mentioned. Although the level of services in those gap areas, it's not clear what level of services might be desired in those areas. It does seem to us that the gap areas would primarily be looking towards maintenance, as well as some beautification in the east gap area, but they wouldn't need the same level of funding for promotions, events, marketing that the downtown businesses need. The combined DDA bid alternative, we got some negative feedback on that. A sense that there's not a lot of momentum in favor of that. It's perceived as too large a jump forward in terms of a district structure and taxing levels. And then as it relates to the parking options that I mentioned, the Metro District Board expressed little interest in dissolving themselves, as well as consolidating parking services between Metro and the city. Next. So we then, based on the steering committee presentation, the feedback on our preliminary conclusions, our preliminary analysis rather, looked at a number of different alternatives in more detail to really see what the implications would be of increased budget and increased areas served. So the first alternative we looked at was looking at just strictly expanding the budget in the existing bid area. So we looked at what if we increase the budget from to allow maintenance and other services, meaning professional services, marketing, beautification, economic development, to be kind of in a 50-50 balance. We basically figured they would need a budget of about $110,000. So going from $65,000 to $110,000 a year. And that in the budget on the left there, you can see provides, you can see what the record or an option is that we analyzed in how much is allocated to the various levels of services to come up with $110,000. We also looked at, in this case, replacing the 30 cent a square foot assessment with a mill levy with an equivalent amount of, well, we looked at replacing the assessment with a mill levy. The advantage of doing a mill levy instead of an assessment is there would be some natural increase in the revenues as property values increase over time, as the assessed values in the properties. And so you wouldn't have to go to a vote or get approval for an assessment increase. The current bid, so basically the equivalent of the 30 cent a square foot assessment would be about 5.5 mils to basically raise the $65,000 that's currently being raised. The expanded budget of 110,000 would require a budget of about 10 mils to cover that. So next slide. So this alternative in terms of its strengths and weaknesses, the strengths is it addresses the needs of the existing bid property owners and maybe an easier initial first step in terms of addressing some of the goals of the project, but certainly not all of them, because it doesn't address the gap area or the URA. The weakness is just that it doesn't address the gap areas and property owner. But our questions about property owner interest outside the downtown core is still pretty much an unknown at this point about their interest, because obviously if it were to be expanded, it would require a vote of those property owners. But expanding the bid to other areas could potentially be phased in as a second phase. So next slide. The next alternative is just that. It would be to expand the bid boundary gateway to gateway. And this alternative looks at how much funding would be required to provide the existing level of services to the entire corridor. So basically going from the $65,000 budget to incorporating the rest of the properties would, at the same mill levy or the same assessment level, would require a budget about $122,000. So, but that obviously doesn't provide any additional funding for, so this alternative doesn't provide what A did in terms of providing additional funding for the bid area. It provides the same level of funding for the whole core. Next slide. So strengths of this alternative, it modestly increases the district budget, but also increases the large amount of properties to be served. The expanded area would provide additional funding to cover those expanded areas, the gap areas, but it wouldn't provide additional funding for the downtown core. The weaknesses, the bid would not current bid property owners would unlikely receive any additional significant revenues for the desired level of services. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a good sense at this point of whether the property owners in the gap areas are interested in paying for additional services and for what level of services they might be willing to pay. So the third alternative, next slide. C, it would be to would be essentially to provide the entire corridor with the increased budget that was in alternative A. So basically moving from the downtown core would have the budget in an alternative A, the first alternative of 110,000. The other areas of the corridor would have the more basic funding level of the existing bid that were shown in alternative B. So differential levels of taxation and differential levels of services based on some assumption that the downtown would require a higher level of service. So under this alternative, the downtown would have a mill levy of 10 mills like it did in alternative A, and the remaining areas of the corridor would have a mill levy of 4 mills for the other sub areas. Next slide. Strengths of this allows the downtown core to receive additional funding above current levels, and it allows the sub areas outside of the downtown core to opt into the district at a more basic level of service. That's essentially what we're trying to test here. The weaknesses noted here are potential for disagreements between the downtown core and the other sub areas due to the differential level of services. So alternative D was replacing the bid with a downtown development authority for the existing bid as well as for the entire corridor. The budget would be the same as for an expanded bid, the total budget of $138,000, which is a little higher than alternative B, and that's because residential properties are included, correct? A bid cannot charge a tax or an assessment on residential property, whereas a DDA can. So then that alternative strengths, next slide, please, could include separate sub areas that are not required to be contiguous, would allow for a replacement of the bid with a more consistent level of service in a larger area, could potentially replace the URA and provide the continued use of TIF throughout the entire downtown area, throughout the entire commercial corridor. The weaknesses are under a DDA, it requires a uniform level of taxation throughout the district, as opposed to the bid could have differential rates for different sub areas. The 5 mil levy may not generate enough revenues to pay for desired operations. As I mentioned earlier, if you're just looking at the existing bid area, it provides a little like $5,000 or $6,000 less than the bid is currently getting under the assessment. But if we're applying it to the entire corridor, we'll obviously get a higher amount of revenue that could be more effectively used across the entire commercial corridor. And then we also noted, because a significant amount of the commercial core of the city would now be subject to TIF in the future, this may there may need to be some kind of negotiation between the city and the district in terms of how much tax increment would be spent, would be allowed to be used by the district, because it's, you know, it's a large portion of your own tax base as well. Alternative E, I think that's the last one, right? Yeah. And that is using a general improvement district instead of a DDA for that expanded boundary, uses the same tax rates as was earlier shown. And as with the DDA, it allows for both commercial and residential properties, results in a somewhat lower mill levy because of the additional residential properties. In our opinion, it really doesn't provide any additional advantages over the DDA. So next slide. I think I already went through that. So
Yeah, one more slide, please.
yeah, sorry. So, I mean, this just shows if all of the areas were in a district, this is the area that we analyzed from the West Gap to the downtown bid to the East Gap area down to the URA. And then next slide, finally. So in terms of that GID or G General Improvement District, it allows for taxing of both commercial and residential properties, can include parking operations as an additional service. Although, as I noted earlier, there's not a lot of support from, I think there was reasonable support from city staff for consolidating parking services, but we certainly noted the resistance of the Metro District Board. And then as far as the weaknesses, residential properties do not contribute a significant amount of revenues, but it also, it seems to us, would be difficult to get residential property owners to vote in favor of a taxation for a district that's primarily focused on commercial operations. So next slide, which is the last slide. Excuse me. So in terms of conclusions and recommended next steps, the alternatives we looked at all present viable options for addressing one or more of the project objectives. The preferred district option, the actual district boundaries, then the budget and the tax levels will require further input from property owners who will need to vote on any changes going forward. In terms of what we recommend for next steps, this feasibility study, I think, provides direction in terms of what our assessment is of the viable options. I think there needs to be a discussion between the city and the recommended district in terms of what roles and responsibilities the city is going to have versus the roles and responsibilities of the recommended district. Certainly, I think a big next step is getting more input from the property owners in the corridor, both in the existing bid and the URA, and as well as in the non-covered areas in terms of what their interests are and what their preferences are. And then, so potentially doing a survey of the property owners on their preferences, as well as potentially additional focus group discussions to really kind of focus on, I mean, the district option is one thing, but also the desired level of service and what they're willing to pay for. So desired services, tolerance for additional taxes, those are obviously two sides of the same coin. And then I think the city and whatever district ends up having the most support will need to address the size and boundaries of the district before going to a vote. So I believe that summarizes the report, which I believe you all have as well, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we'll open it up to questions and comments from council. Mr. Shea, did you see?
Yeah, I have a question for you. Just for people's edification who are not with us following with you step by step. Of all these taxing districts, what was it seemed like to me about the largest pool of money was that you estimated by an expansion of like, DDA and stuff like that was what, about $161,000?
Well, that's the largest amount of the options we looked at. Obviously, if you increase the tax rate, you can
Right.
you could get a lot
Right.
more money,
Right.
but we
Right.
were trying to be
Right.
somewhat I don't know if the right word is conservative, or
Right.
we were trying to analyze modest budget increases that address sort of the primary needs, but
Well-
not like triple the size of the budget,
Well, the reason why I brought it up is because I think that's a fairly kind of modest kind of chunk of money.
Yeah.
Okay, and you did sort of kind of give a caveat that, weren't certain in terms of what kind of services people need and stuff like that, and all these overlaying things. So one thing that just occurred to me was that as an option that maybe wasn't considered was just getting rid of all these districts, just period. Okay. And the reason why I say that is that removes essentially kind of a tax burden. It kind of removes all this unevenness. Okay. And one of the things that I think that we've seen just as a contrast, and I was just doing a quick figuring, and Denise can help me in terms of if I'm like way out in left field on this, but as near as I can tell, our parking enterprise is about a $4 million a year business, right?
I think that's what we showed, like.
Right, exactly, right. And so to me, we basically have started to get pretty creative with how we use that money in terms of we're doing a lot of kind of public transit with it. We're doing lots of paving projects with it and stuff like that. And the reason why I throw that out is that I see that as another option, which is to get rid of all these districts, okay? And all these gnarly overlap things and what kind of services and things like that. And I think we could probably come up with some pretty fair conclusions that a fair amount of the avenue would probably be served well for the public good, that all the sidewalks would be in good shape, that the snow would be cleared off of them, okay? And that some of the landscaping needs and stuff like that, that we'd be able to cover those expenses. We know where those, areas are that need it. And to me, it just seems like as another option, I would be interested in just basically, as a thought, disbanding all these districts, okay, relieving these property owners, okay, of essentially these assessments or these mills and stuff like that, okay, and funding when we're really talking about, a few $100,000 is basically what we're talking about, okay, that are kind of minimal services. And so even if we doubled that and said the budget is $400,000 or something like that, that's a minor portion of our revenues that we're collecting in our parking district. And I guess I'm just throwing that out as a thought, as a way of going forward, as opposed to rejiggering all of this, having all these votes. I've been kind of watching, what's been going on with the old Colorado City thing. And I mean, they're all tied up in knots right now as to how in the world they're going to figure out how to get people to vote in all these properties that are tucked into limited liability companies and who is it that can really vote and stuff like that. And they're all tied up in knots in terms of even just figuring out how to proclamate kind of a vote. So I'm just throwing it out, what if we got rid of these things, okay, and took some of this stuff in as a part of the funding with our parking district, just as a thought. Thank you.
It's, I mean, it is an interesting approach, and my it wasn't in our scope of services per se, but I mean, we did sort of note that the vast revenue that the corridor has is parking revenues, specifically the city parking itself, almost 4 million in revenues, and then the Metro District on top of that. So, I mean, it pales, or the other districts pale by comparison in terms of how much revenue is included.
And I guess I see the entire corridor of Manitou, and I think the council recently bought a pretty significant chunk of land down in the URA with a vision of essentially providing a parking footprint kind of closer to essentially the bypass, and trying to figure out how that parking can be utilized by essentially the east corridor as well as the west corridor, and kind of tying all of this, commerce together, as well as just the needs of people to transit in that corridor without using their automobile and whatnot, which is a really critical need in Manitou, is that we get out of this thing of everybody transiting with their car and pursuing all of these parking places that, may or may not be available. And so to me, I think this is a doable kind of an enterprise in terms of, I think we can figure out what those basic common denominators are of what those services are. Now, as far as tax increment financing and stuff like that, that's a whole nother kind of a gnarly subject on top of it, in terms of whether we'd want to get, but for these basic services, it seems like to me they could be just pulled in, and we could cover it even if we found that our $4 million wasn't cutting it. I mean, for us to increase even at a marginal rate the cost of our parking, okay, is just pennies, spread across, thousands and thousands of cars that are being parked. Thank you.
Well, there's certain, I think you make some excellent, points that I would agree with. I mean, certainly looking at the existing, it makes no sense to me that the parking is being bifurcated between Metro and the city. But that's something I think the city certainly has the ability to rectify if it wanted to do so.
Well, I think the other thing is that we tonight, had a great volunteer step forward for our Historic Preservation Commission, which is really great. Okay. And we had recognition of planning and whatnot. But as a small community, what we really struggle with is getting enough volunteers to be on these boards. Okay. Deal with all this complexity of kind of all this governance with all these different kind of boards and URAs and stuff like that. But by the time you kind of look at all this multiplier of each one of these things having another attorney and office expenses and insurance and stuff like that, I was just thinking, are these basic services or just something that are stuff that we could just pull into essentially our parking enterprise, get it done, and we're not going back out like we do right now and asking a little bit of money for holiday decorations out of this entity, and then another one here and another one here, when in reality, we really do know that in the middle of the winter, we like to kind of have that kind of extra light and kind of festivity. And we probably just really do want to dress up, all of the main avenue, as opposed to trying to figure out how in the world we get everybody to pay something out of all these districts. So just a thought. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Natalie, I believe you had a comment?
Sure.
So yeah, that is exactly the conclusion that the steering committee reached. And so they're really looking for tonight the opportunity to come forward to council at a later date with 3 or 4 additional options, one of them being the one you presented, but just that the idea that I think we all felt like none of these options were quite a fit for us. And so I think that that was just the trick, was that I don't think any of us thought that we would solve this as a council tonight, but we wanted an opportunity to really explore these next steps, because we do feel like this document has a ton of numbers that are fantastic for us to build off, but that the solution is not before us this evening. And so I just wanted to mention that we can try to troubleshoot tonight, but we can also just say we need to continue this conversation because you are correct that this is a lot of work for $120,000 or $140,000 or whatever.
Or we need to not continue that.
Correct, yeah.
I mean, that's another
Good.
option. Hello.
No, it was an option. Yeah, that was an
Sorry,
option.
Julie,
Oh, I see.
Julie,
That's what you're
let's
saying.
let Natalie
Okay.
finish, then we'll
No,
come
I
to you,
get you.
Julie.
No,
Okay,
you're
no,
right.
that's
We
right.
could just stop. No, you're right. Okay. Yeah, that is an option we could consider this evening. So thanks, Julie. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Natalie.
Well, if the option that Councilman Shada outlined, the city took over the maintenance functions, which, as he noted, are not hugely expensive. I think right now there is a fair, our understanding anyway, is a fair amount of push and pull between the city, who pays for what in terms of where the line stops between snow removal in the right of way and the property owner. So there, it seems like a potential option, if the city's interested in moving that direction, would be to take over the maintenance beautification functions and look at a DDA, look at a tax increment financing district for capital improvements and for gap financing on redevelopment projects, which, you know, does allow the city to, as you know, to tap into the revenues from the other taxing districts to provide more money for those kinds of functions.
Okay, thank you. Julie, please.
I like the idea of doing nothing. I don't like any of these ideas, and I don't want to spend more money on more ideas. It's ridiculous to me. We can provide these services. Let the URA expire and whatever it's called, sunshine out, die, nice death, and be done. There's no reason we have to have all this expensive, crazy stuff just so we can figure out how to provide basic services. That's what cities do. I don't see any need for any of this. I think it's a waste of time and money.
Thank you, Julie. Comments? No. And actually, Julie, I like your comments. I look at 5 options here and I don't see really a front runner there. And I guess, I think back, okay, it's past time, or it's time that we need to find out what the people who would actually pay the tax, what they think. And I contacted Leslie Lewis earlier today to see if she was going to be here, and she had a prior commitment. But I did get an email back and she said, really, the property owners need to know what they're going to get, what it's going to cost. I mean, you go to buy a car or grapefruit or whatever, you look at what's the value? Is this what you want? And is it a reasonable price? And that's what the people who will have to pay this tax, assuming something would go through, they would have to vote it in. They would have to want it. And I mean, the bid, the Metro, and the URA were all things that people in town or from town ask for. And I think probably in some cases they're worn out. It's time to either rethink that or just, and Julie, I could live with probably just leaving it the way it is. I don't see that we're there'd be a huge advantage here. I guess one of the things when we were talking about economic development, one of my concerns was, what do we do if marijuana declines, which is what it's doing? What if we have a year when, the national economy goes bad and that hurts tourism a lot harder than it hurts other things? So what do we need to do to make our economy more robust and more resilient? And these are strategies, and that tells you how to get the money. But if you're I don't think if we don't have kind of a diversity or that we're really not being aggressive in getting people in marketing, and being a real destination, then we've got some problems there. And at the same time, there's always that balance of quality of life. So there's a lot of issues here. Trying to solve them in one session here, well, we're not going to do that. But I do think, Julie, your comments about maybe we just leave this alone and go on might be a good thing. I guess my next step though would be to ask essentially the people who are going to pay the taxes what they think. Council over here, what do you, Judith, I'm sure you'll have something.
Well, this is one of those great examples where I really do appreciate the information that you brought us, but I did singly, without consulting with any other council members, kind of came to the same conclusion. Let's do nothing now and, or, consider Counselor Shada's idea of just letting these things sunset. But this is also one of these presentations where I get a little frustrated when we sandwich a presentation like this in an already packed agenda on a night when a lot of us were planning on doing some other things this evening, because it really deserves a standalone work session on its own. And sometimes it just kind of shows me that if the steering committee came to the same conclusion and, and we're kind of setting on doing nothing, I get real frustrated when we got, well, let's pay a, consultant to do this and give us this data and this data and this data. I think sometimes the council just needs to sit down in a work session and hash some of this stuff out and say, hey, instead of spending $20,000 on the consultants, which I'm glad you did this work and I'm glad you brought it here because it shows us and the community just how huge this could be. That sometimes the most simplest approach. I am going to say it out loud that I am not opposed to the Mountain Metro District being absorbed into the enterprise fund. So I'm one of those people that I think that some decisions have to be made, and I think that they can be made. But I'd love to contribute to have another work session that we devote just to this and give it give it the time it really deserves to do a deeper dive. But thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, do you have anything?
No comment. I'm fine with the way it is right now. Thank you.
Just a minute here, John. Let me give Nancy a chance. Nancy, do you have, and then John.
Yeah, two things. One, the Mountain Metro is not interested in being absorbed at this point in time and haven't been for years. I mean, this has been an ongoing discussion from as long as, well before I've been on council.
Understood.
And my understanding is they had to be voted in initially by the member properties, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And when they were, again, 1989, I believe was the day the property owners of the district voted to form it. At the
Right.
time, I believe they were paying 13 mills to generate
right.
money to build the
My
parking.
question is, would the same property owners have to vote to dissolve the Metro District?
Excuse
I
me, can
defer to the
excuse me,
city
sir, just a
attorney
minute.
on that.
Sir, excuse me, just, I need to clarify something. We've been referring to Mountain Metro. Mountain Metro is the bus company.
Right.
The Metro District is, okay, you said the Metro District, and I think somewhere so Nancy,
I'm well aware of what the Metro District is,
Are we
not
talking about-
Mountain Metro. I'm talking about the Metro District.
the Metro District, okay.
All I was going to say is, I'm not an attorney, so I can't. I do know that the district can be dissolved through an IGA with the city. Now, whether the city can force the dissolution of the Metro District, I don't know the answer to that.
And so my question is for both the Metro District as well as the bid. I know the URA sunsets, but there's nothing, I'm not aware of anything that sunsets either the bid or the Metro District, and that I had
believe
always
that's
thought that they
correct.
would both have to be voted by the member properties to dissolve. I'm looking at you, Jeff.
I'm not sure. I'm looking it up right now, but I think you're right.
Okay. And my second question or not question, but comment is simply that my main concern is on economic development. And I do see that there's potential at this point in time for the maintenance and beautification to be picked up by the city ultimately. Although I, like Judith, would love to see this fleshed out a bit more and given a bit more time and effort before we do away with or just stop working on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And John, you had a comment?
Jeff, just to give you comfort, I've been watching the Colorado Springs process and they've been trying to figure out how to dissolve one of these things. And they've decided that it's practically impossible. So they're setting the mill levy to zero.
Leave it in place.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. They can't figure out how to get rid of some of these things. All right. In terms of just the overhead of winding it down, having the vote, finding the whole process and the whole deal. And they finally ended up, I heard just like in last month, they just decided to just set it to zero.
Perfect
Okay.
solution. Yeah, I mean, there's probably a couple of ways to handle it, skin the cat, right? But I just didn't want to give you the wrong answer. So,
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to clarify was Judith said Mountain Metro, and I think she just meant the parking district, our parking district. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. That was where I came off the rails too. Denise, please.
Mayor, I just want to say a couple of things. There was a statement that there's some push and pull of what the bid does and what the city does. I will say we work very collaborative. And whenever the bid needs some help, we're always there to assist in any way that we can. I recommend, we're already as a city doing a lot of this. We do all the snow removal that is from Ruxton up. So that we do right now, we have to because there's nobody that's doing that. We're also doing some beautification for the downtown. We take care of the gardens that's downtown. So there's a large portion of this that we already do. And maybe this discussion can happen during the budget session and talk a little bit about it during the parking. And then also I think the group has some other ideas that they can meet and come back with some additional conversation also, if that works for this council.
Seeing some heads nod, and of course, the budget meeting is not far away. It's October the 12th, a week from Saturday. So we have that. Okay, well, I think the purpose of this session here is essentially informational. It does seem to me like it would be appropriate to find out what the potential taxpayers in the area what their opinions are, what they would expect in return for what they would have to pay. I don't know if that's worth pursuing, or if we just want to talk about it at our budget session before we give any further direction. Julie?
I was going to piggyback, yes, on what you just said and what Denise said. I think this is worth discussing at the budget meeting coming up. And it might be something that maybe the URA wants to do some investigative reporting, or maybe the chamber wants to do some investigation to see how the individual business owners feel about X, Y, and Z. Sounds like it'd be quite the project to figure out even what all the questions would be. But I think we should at least table it till the 12th. Plus, it's getting late and I thought we were supposed to be allowed to go watch the debate.
And Julie, that was our original intent. The executive session that we spent the first hour on, that had not been anticipated. That was a matter that the legal advice was that it was urgent, that we needed to deal with it sooner rather than later. So, but okay. Well, if it's okay with council, we'll go into this in more detail on October the 12th. Meanwhile, I think the Chamber of Commerce is going to sample some of their members and people at large to figure out what their desires might be. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And the short answer on the Metro dissolution is a petition gets filed and then they have to have an election. And it goes through the court process too, but that's basically it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Yes. Well, and it's 7:20, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, council, we have two items left here, and I know A number of us were hoping to see and I imagine people in the audience too might want to see the debate. We could probably, should we push through and not take a break, or does anybody want a break, need a break? 60-second. Okay, 3-minute break. Okay, if we could go ahead and resume the meeting. The next item is presentation and discussion on natural medicine. We have Elena and Chelsea. Elena, please.
Thank you. For the record, Elena Krebs, City Clerk.
Chelsea Royston, City Planner.
So we were asked to bring some information to council due to the impending licensing regarding natural medicine businesses. So next slide. Anyways, so what is natural medicine? It's essentially magic mushrooms, and it's a natural psychedelic found in over 200 species of mushrooms worldwide. Historically, they've been used for indigenous and tribal communities for spiritual and ceremonial purposes. For the purpose of the law, it's now going to be regulated through natural medicine healing centers, cultivation centers, manufacturing, and that was in testing. Thank you. The effects include euphoria, auditory and hallucinations, and depending on the dose and the individual's history of use, these effects can range up to 4 to 6 hours. Research suggests that the use of this natural medicine can help decrease depression and anxiety and overall increase quality of life. For the law, it's defined as psilocybin and psilocin for this first phase, which will begin licensing at the end of the year. For the second phase, pending review and inclusion will be ibogaine, dimethyltryptamine or DMT, and mescaline, and that is pending review on or after June 1st of 2026. And then obviously natural medicine products are things that are infused with the mushrooms, which include gummies, chocolate, and drinks. Next slide. So just as a legislative overview, this came about from Proposition 122, which was a citizen initiated back in the November 2022 election. With the passage, it legalized personal use, possession, and cultivation, and directed the state to create a regulated natural medicine program. With that, it allows people to visit what are called natural medicine healing centers that will have so that way they can be administered natural medicine and be watched by a licensed facilitator. To clarify some of the language and establish the regulatory framework, Senate Bill 23290, or the Regulatory Act, was signed into law back in May of 2023. This charged the Department of Regulatory Agencies, or DORA, and the Department of Revenue with the rulemaking, the implementation, and the licensing for this. It also established that people can individually grow their own product in their own homes, but only in a 12 by 12 square foot area. And it needs to be enclosed. I will say that it also decriminalizes the fact that somebody can share this medicine with other people that are 21 years of age or older without breaking any local laws. Next slide. So so there was a survey taken by the state, and the interest was mostly in natural medicine healing centers. This is a licensed facility where people can visit and you can be administered the medicine. You just can't show up there. There's an appointment and there is an administration session, a preparation session, and an integration session. So with the preparation session, so far the rulemaking is that the facilitators need to establish a plan that the participant is going to be getting home safely. They go over their mental health history, because it is suggested that you should not partake in this natural medicine services if you have any sort of mental health issues, such as things that you're on for SSRIs, like psychoactive meds. And they also have established some rulemaking where the facilitators will watch you, just make sure that your quote unquote trip goes okay. They also have some rules about how to handle in case somebody has adverse effects. And they also, I think they are coming up with rules on how to respond for first responders. So next slide. So what that means though is that overall, the state is the primary entity that will be handling all of this licensing. And for the local municipalities, all we can do is regulate the time, the place, and the manner in which these are operated. The state is expected to begin this licensing as of December 31st of this year. And if we don't have any sort of adopted rules or regulations in place by then, they can start, that means we don't have any say in where they are or how they operate. And
All right. So one key difference between how natural medicine is going to be regulated and how marijuana and liquor are regulated is that local jurisdictions may not prohibit the establishment from locating within our municipal boundaries. We also cannot prohibit the transportation of natural medicine on public roadways or create any regulations that are unreasonable or conflict with the state law. So next slide, please. We did a review of peer communities. A couple that stood out to us were Parker, which allows these as a use by right in specific zone districts. They do buffer 1,000 feet from residential zone districts, which means they are not allowed within 1,000 feet of the exterior boundary of that zone. They have screening requirements similar to what we see for marijuana, where you cannot see from the public right of way into the business. They also limit the hours of operation from Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And there are local penalties for individuals who grow outside of what's allowed. Durango is a use by right in non-residential zones, and they are regulated as medical offices. In Castle Rock, they are allowed as a use by right in certain zone districts, also buffered 1,000 feet from residential zones, and also have Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 hours of operation. And Boulder is considering regulating them as medical office use and buffering 1,000 feet from residential zones. Next slide. So our approach here is to model our code after what we have for marijuana. And the framework that we're suggesting is to allow them as a conditional use permit in certain zone districts. And so conditional use permits you saw at the beginning of marijuana legalization, where they were permitted once, and that went before City Planning Commission and then City Council to be allowed to operate. And they get an annual renewal because we have a local licensing authority. So I do an annual inspection at both facilities and make sure that they are meeting all of the standards and conditions that they were imposed. So with natural medicine, we do not have that local licensing authority. So what you would see is under our proposed framework is that initial approval as a conditional use permit. And then it would have a business license review every year. So again, conditional use permits are reviewed first by staff, then by City Planning Commission with a recommendation to City Council. And so again, we're recommending a course of action, but we would really like to have City Council's direction on a few key items, though any other items that may be come up in the course of conversation or anything like that, we are also happy to take a look at. Or if there's another framework that you all would prefer, we can absolutely explore that as well. So for some of these items, we're looking at zoning. So for instance, marijuana is limited to commercial zone districts in the URA area. So that is east of the Highway 24 interchange. In the packet, there were several maps that we included with different types of buffers. I don't know if I'll be able to pull those up at all. Okay. So the first one that we will go to is, let's go with the parks buffer with commercial zone full map. Yes. So what you see here, the red indicates the commercial zoning district throughout town. The green are the parks areas. The light blue is a 500-foot buffer from parks. And the dark blue is a 1,000-foot buffer from parks. Now, state regulation allows us to buffer from certain land uses. Parks was brought up as a potential. However, you're seeing most municipalities buffer from residential, and the state mandates that we buffer from schools and childcare facilities. So it's a little hard to see on the projector, and I apologize for that, but really buffering from parks, even with just 500 feet, significantly reduces the number of commercial zoned properties that are available for these uses. And so I think what we would be looking for is direction on if we would like to buffer from parks or if we would like to buffer from other types of land uses. We can do that. However, we do need to be cautious that we're not creating the unreasonable regulations as noted in law. So I think, let me get back to my memo here. What we would be looking for, I've provided kind of 3 alternatives just to help guide the discussion, but again, we're open to any sort of conversation. We would be looking for direction on zoning if, for instance, you would be inclined to allow natural medicine businesses as a conditional use in all commercial zone districts, as conditional use permits just in the URA, which is also what we see with marijuana, or to allow natural medicine businesses as a use by right in commercial zone districts. The reason I've identified commercial zone districts as being appropriate for this use is because, in staff's opinion, as why commercial zoning in other parts of town may also be appropriate is because we don't anticipate that natural medicine businesses will require the same amount of off-street parking as retail marijuana does, for instance. If we were to regulate these businesses as medical offices, they would require 1 parking space per 400 square foot of gross floor area, which for comparison, we require 1 parking space per 200 square foot for retail marijuana uses. So I do believe that natural medicine businesses could fit on a smaller footprint in a denser part of town, maybe some of the smaller commercially zoned lots that currently aren't being used. But so that is the first area of discussion.
Excuse me, Julie, do you have a question you need to?
Yeah, am I allowed to ask a question?
I think so. Yeah, clarifying question. Have you?
Yeah, clarifying
Sure.
question. Yeah. You had talked about, and maybe this is a Jeff Parker question. She talked about the conditional use permit, and I'm just trying to think if DORA or DOR, Department of Regulatory Agencies, if we give a conditional use permit and that runs with the land, but then you have a new owner come in, wouldn't that new owner still have to do anything with?
They still
the
have to get,
state?
yeah, so I look at it as sort of two aspects. There's like the licensing aspect, which is all handled by the state. So who can operate them, get the licenses, change of ownership, that kind of stuff, all done by the state. And then your location is governed by us. So the state will basically, if there's a change of ownership, it can still be the same business. It'll just have to go through the state to get the ownership change done. And the state will also look to us and say, well, was that permitted? Is that a legal area for the business to operate? As long as we did it. So I don't think that would be an issue.
Oh, okay, thank you. And
Yeah.
then my other, I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but when we were talking about the, and I forget what the acronym for it was kind of cute, but the sex businesses.
These,
What?
SOB.
Oh, yeah, the
sexually
SOB.
oriented
I knew it was
businesses.
something
Yeah.
cute. Yeah. So when we were discussing SOBs, before the city decided to just outlaw sex stores completely, we did all of this machination with 1,000 feet here and 500 feet there, and we came up with a piece of property that was actually the trading post. And that's when Tim House had a, complete meltdown. And so he got the city to change whatever. But couldn't we just, and we could use that same, whatever the 1,000 feet from here and couldn't we?
Yeah,
use that same drawing?
probably not. And so there's a difference between the laws that affect SOBs and these natural medicine facilities is that the regulation of sexually oriented businesses is governed by a federal Supreme Court case, which basically says, because there's a constitutional right, which is the freedom of speech involved with sexually oriented businesses, the law basically said is you have to provide a spot where they can locate, whether it's available or not.
Right.
So that's kind of why all these jurisdictions just found like one spot that they can locate, kind of thinking that's in compliance. The law for natural medicine is you can't ban them and you can't have any unreasonable restrictions. And so I think that if you basically just found one location that's never going to ever, be used for natural medicine facilities, that's not going to meet that standard. A little different standard.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome.
John, quick question.
I think you guys gave a comment that some of the authorities that you were comparing us to were doing a restriction from residential zones, right? And I noticed in the packet, there isn't, unless I'm interpreting these maps differently, there is none of those things that show from the residential thing, right?
Yes, that's correct. Honestly, that's purely a logistical issue with our mapping software. And we can provide that. However, it does have the effect of not allowing it in any commercial zone districts.
Okay. So that's why you're suggesting that a good route is to regulate it very similar to the way we regulated 420, correct? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify as well, I know it's a little intimidating to have conditional uses that run with the land. Our alternative is a temporary use permit, which really isn't appropriate for a business that will be, in theory, operating more than 1 year. Our code does limit temporary use permits to a 1-year approval period, and it would change the body of authority from city council to city planning commission for that approval. That's just kind of how temporary uses are designed in our code. And so I really do feel that conditional use permits give us the most precise ability to regulate these. I'm going to move on to item 2 that we need direction on, if that's quite all right.
That would be fine,
Okay.
please.
Sorry. I feel the clock. I feel it ticking. We also have that states have predetermined a buffer of 1,000 feet from schools, licensed childcare facilities, and residential childcare facilities. According to state databases, we do not have any licensed childcare facilities in the city of Manitou Springs except for at schools. So that made our mapping a little bit easier. So for that one, we can view our schools buffer with commercial zone map. Schools buffer with commercial zone, please. Okay, here you can see our 3 school properties. The state law is explicit in that it does not require buffering from properties that are owned by the school unless they are developed with the school building. So that's why you only see those 3 properties there. So with this buffer, we do have quite a bit of commercially zoned properties available still. And then, sorry, I lost my spot again. Okay. We have hours of operation as another item that we can regulate. As you saw in our comparison communities, hours of 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, are being pursued by numerous communities. Manitou Springs Code prohibits marijuana sales between before 8 a.m. and after midnight, 7 days a week. So here, I guess the discussion could probably focus around resources for enforcing the hours of operation, as well as accessibility to natural medicine services for potential participants who may not have flexible schedules. And so there are a couple things there, but that's, just items to be considered by city council. And number 4, the number of licensed facilities we are looking into. I'm not entirely sure if this is able to be regulated through our legislature, but given that we have limited marijuana businesses to 2 dual license facilities in town, I thought it would be a helpful conversation to have and get legal opinion on. Am I forgetting anything?
No.
All right. So back to you.
Great, thank you. Natalie?
Just have a quick question. So, so if we were to pass an ordinance on this, how easy would it be to amend it if it doesn't work the way we thought it would?
It would be as easy as amending any other portion of code.
Once it's out there.
Ex-
But I mean, if
just-
we wanted to
Julie,
change
could you
hours of operation.
Julie, would you use the microphone?
Oh, sorry.
Julie, could you
If we
restate what you
wanted
said?
to-
but
I'm just asking, like, if we
with the
wanted to
microphone.
change the hours of operation, like extend them,
So
is that something that we could do?
we
once
could
a
do that
license is
for
issued?
facilities that are licensed after the change goes into effect. So it wouldn't have a retroactive effect on the conditional use permits previously permitted.
Okay, perfect.
However, I did want to point out as well, I think I forgot to mention it, but conditional use permits do lapse if they are inactive for a year. So there is a bit of attrition on conditional use permits that you'll see over time.
As a note, though, I mean, you could have an hours of operation that is just in your ordinance. And it wouldn't be a condition of the conditional use permit. It would apply to them all. And then you would just, if you change the ordinance, you change the hours of operation, it would apply to everything.
Okay,
So,
that's what I'm just
yeah,
trying to work
yeah,
out, like
sure, yeah.
how much flexibility we have, because we're just trying this out, so.
Yeah, I mean, you can basically change your code like you can change any code.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of whether it'll affect the use that's already been permitted.
Mhm.
So you probably couldn't make a lot of changes to like where it's located and all that, but if you have conditions of operation that are just in your ordinance, those could change.
Okay, thank you.
So that would essentially just be in practice how staff would bring it forward, and the conditions that we would impose would be reflective of the code rather than explicitly to that business.
Yeah, and if you did have conditions on that particular business that, if city council's thinking, oh, that's too strict or something like that, you could always look to relieve them via a hearing to alter the conditional use. Because an owner's probably not going to complain about lessening the restrictions, but if you're going to tighten them on an already approved conditional use, that's where you're going to have trouble.
Great, thank you. Michelle?
When you looked at the peer community Durango, how many medical offices do they have that are regulated?
Didn't say, to be honest. They said at that point, so they just were updating their land development code. So it didn't specify how many establishments they actually had in place.
But there's none that are being permitted until the end of the year anyways. So there won't be any permitted yet. Maybe they have, yeah, so.
I guess Michelle follow on and then,
Yeah, just to follow up, do you know how many they're looking at?
No.
thank you. Nancy, then Judith.
Yeah, my inclination is to go tighter up front, more strict up front, and then loosen it up as this grand experiment plays out. But my going in position on just knowing what I know at this point, which isn't a whole lot, is that we follow your recommendation, do a conditional use permit, that 500 feet buffer without parks, and that Monday through Saturday or Sunday. But I do think it should be at least one weekend day, but 8 to 5, and limit it to no more than probably 3 or 4 max in the city. I'm not an advocate at this point of limiting it to just the ORA area, because I do think that there are other commercial areas, as you stated, that could be appropriate or with the parking restrictions. So that's just kind of where my starting out until we discuss this at greater length. Thank you.
Okay, I think that was helpful. Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. This is more of an FYI thing. I attended the CML annual seminar on municipal law, and I attended primarily to attend this breakout session on Prop 122, and it was very, very informative because the town attorney from the town of Castle Rock, the assistant city attorney from Boulder, and the town attorney from Parker were there sharing their experiences. And they, as mayor pro tem, recommended they got some community input, which I think is really vital. And by and large, at least in Castle Rock and Parker, there was quite a bit of resistance and folks wanted to go with the most restrictive route. But there was a very robust discussion afterwards, and the discussion was all on time, place, and manner restrictions. And all three of the moderators said that the time restriction was the hardest for them to figure out because of the nature of when someone comes in, they are, they're in a psychedelic state for up to 4 to 6 hours. And so one of the ways that they restricted was the hours. So 8 to 5 Monday through Friday restricts, quite a few people who work and they don't have any weekend hours. So I agree with Mayor Pro Tem, if we're going to proceed with this, that we consider some evening hours and or weekend hours as part of this process, because you don't want someone coming in at 5 and having, a psychedelic experience and, sending them home. I know that there's licensing issues with the providers, but so going back to, I have one question, going back to the slide you showed about the 1,000 feet from the parks seems to be obviously the most restrictive of all of the maps that you put in here. Am I right? Seem to be the most, but if we had CUPs and we allowed these facilities to operate throughout the commercial district with the 500 or 1,000 foot restriction from parks, do you know how many do you have any sense of how many would reasonably be able to operate? I mean, it's a pretty
think
small area.
What I think that kind of brings up a specific question where I think you can have multiple facilitators licensed at one facility. And correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yeah, no, that's correct.
so it would be truly like a medical clinic that has multiple doctors. And so I think we could see any number of licenses there. But the properties that are issued a CUP, I don't have an exact count on that, and I apologize.
And my follow-up question is, so you have the facilities themselves, but then you have regulations regarding the manufacturer and the storage and so are those regulations, and maybe Jeff, this is a question for you, are those all encompassed in the medical facility per se? Because are there not different?
Yeah, they could be totally different types of facilities. So like they would be like separate. Is that what your question was?
No, it's like, so this Prop 122 regulates not just the medical facility where you're having a licensed practitioner distribute this to a patient.
Yeah, those are
or
called
client,
healing centers.
but there's also the manufacturing centers and the distribution centers. And how do those play into what facilities we can allow?
No, yeah. So there's basically 4 different kinds of facilities. There's a healing center, there's a manufacturing facility, there's a cultivation facility, and there's a testing facility. And so all of those, the rules that apply to what you can regulate, which is basically can't be unreasonable, it can't be a prohibition, and they can you can impose time, place, and manner type restrictions. That applies to all 4 of those kinds of facilities.
Thank you. Oh, Julie, please.
So under the under this law would, because I'm thinking in terms of parking for a minute and in terms of how many people will be coming and going. Can someone just show up to the, I assume it would be the healing center or whatever they call it, and say, I've already qualified, I've got PTSD, I'm an Iraq veteran, and I want, 5 gummies to bring home so I can use it at home. Is that an option, or everybody who's using this stuff has to sit around for the next 6 hours and stay in the doctor's office? Well, what's the deal?
You
How
have
does
to
that-
stay in the
They have to
actual,
stay in the doctor's office for
yes,
the
the entire
experience?
duration that you were quote
You
unquote.
can't, there's nothing like taking it home.
No, there's no retail at all.
Oh. So therefore, you can expect that if you're gonna close your doors at 6 PM, you can't have your customer. I mean, can't they send their customer home high, or is that
No.
regulated by DORA?
So as part of the licensing rulemaking, they have decided that the facilitator needs to make sure that the participant has a safe way to get home.
Oh, okay, so you can go in, do your drugs and take an Uber home. So you don't have to sit around for 6 hours like you told me a
No,
second
so
ago.
they are going to
No.
make sure that that person is,
As long as you can get
they're going
home
to
safely.
determine how, if they are no longer high or under the,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think you're supposed to have your whole experience there.
Oh, well, then
It
you're
isn't like-
saying
It isn't like you
opposite.
just walk in, they give it to you, you take it there and walk out, or they can't give it to you to go. It's not for to go, and it's not for taking there and leaving 5 minutes later. It's supposed to all be part of the,
I see.
yeah.
So their last appointment will obviously be at least 4 hours before
Pretty
closing.
early, right?
I will say that Breckenridge just passed on their first reading for an ordinance that regulated the time, and they decided to leave it open. So they don't regulate the days or the times. They're keeping that subject to the licensee.
As a note, I know there's some talk about the cultivation, manufacturing, testing facilities. We don't have any of those, for marijuana. I'm not sure if we do permit testing facilities, but we ban cultivation and we banned manufacturing, but you're probably going to end up with really dealing with healing centers, I would expect. I don't know for sure, but that's going to probably be your main.
Or a big greenhouse somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure where that would go in your city, but maybe there's room for them. And I guess for marijuana, for the mushrooms, you don't need quite the same size of a facility, I don't think, as you would for marijuana. So maybe they would have a little more accessibility here.
Any development like that would still have to meet development standards and potentially historic review.
Mhm.
So
It seems sort of weird that, it seems odd that, if you can't leave until you're done being high, why do they care if you're near a park or if you're near a school? I mean, it's not like you have syphilis and you might have sex with some kid and get them a venereal disease. I mean, for goodness sake, just going in, it just seems odd. that it
Same
would be
reason
so-
for marijuana, same reason for alcohol. They just look at it as like one of these activities they just don't want near certain facilities. It's the same logic, but
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, yeah, as a note, I think you already mentioned it, but you can reduce the distance limitations. You just can't expand them. So you can make them you can get rid of them entirely if you wanted to. You just can't make them further apart. So, so if you think it's not necessary, you can change it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Mr. Shada?
Yeah, can you change the slide to your parks buffer thing, please? I'm suddenly confused with what the
parks buffer map, please. It's a different VF.
I'm confused about what the commercial zones that you were drawing in there mean in the red area. That doesn't make sense to me. So I'm trying to figure out if we use some of these rubrics that you're suggesting of 500 feet, 1,000 feet, and so what this means.
Sorry,
That's the school
one with the green.
It's the other one.
So the areas in red are the
Yeah.
areas that are currently zoned commercial.
Yeah, but that's not accurate in terms of, then that map's not correct because there's more commercial areas downtown that aren't showing in there.
No, those are actually zoned downtown, in the
Oh,
downtown zone district.
okay, all right,
So
that's
this
the
isn't,
distinction.
Yeah, this is just commercial, not downtown. So you wouldn't see
Okay.
it in
Okay.
our main commercial
Okay,
area.
so
or-
then there's just one other little wrinkle, which is the parks that are up around Higginbotham Flats are not drawn in there correctly as far as the buffers. In other words, we have a park up there on Higginbotham Flats. Okay, and so just as a comment on this drawing, that little triangle up there by the highway is Higginbotham's Flat Park. And so that should be probably drawn as green. And then it should show the, blue and light blue and blue circles around it. Thank you. Thank you for that
Yeah,
clarification.
I
Thank you so much.
apologize for that inaccuracy.
Great. Well, Counselor, we're being asked to provide direction in 4 areas. So we can continue kind of having a general discussion and then address each of the 4 areas separately, or if we just want to go around the room, like Nancy already kind of indicated all her criteria. What's council's pleasure? We can poll the audience here, and then maybe we need more discussion, or maybe we can just take one at each requirement at a time. Any preference? Is that okay? Okay. Yeah, does that sound, let's see if we can get a consensus on each requirement here then. So the first is zoning. And in the memo, the staff's memo, they provided 3 flavors, A, B, and C. First, allow natural medicine businesses as a conditional use in all commercial zone districts. B, allow natural medicine businesses as conditional use in the URA, basically. And C, allow natural medicine businesses as use by right in the commercial zone district. So it's in all of these, it's referred to a commercial zone. So maybe the first question is, do we want to restrict it to commercial zones? And then do we want to have it as a commercial use? Maybe we can cover them both in the same polling. Michelle, what are your thoughts? Or do you want to think on it for a minute?
Can I think on it for a minute,
Okay,
please?
Judith?
Well, I think it should be limited to the commercial zone. All commercial zones that qualify, given the restrictions that we'll talk about in a minute. And based on the conference I went to, I'm leaning toward use by right. So.
Okay, thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, I had said conditional use permit in all commercial zones, all commercial zone districts.
So Nancy, conditional use permit and all commercial zones. John?
I agree with Nancy.
Okay, so John, you are also conditional use permit in commercial zones, all commercial zones? Is that correct? Okay, great. Natalie?
I'm for conditional use, but I would actually like to see it outside of the historic downtown. Just because the windows would be like, painted over or whatever. It's kind of a walkable area.
Okay, so you're saying conditional use permit?
All
Are you saying,
commercial zones outside of the historic downtown.
okay, all commercial zones outside of downtown?
Sorry, could I ask for clarification? So this map doesn't indicate that the downtown zone district is included. So when you say outside of the historic downtown, do you mean outside of commercial zones that are also in historic district overlays?
I believe the way this is reflected, I just wanted to make that statement.
Okay,
that I
great.
would like to see it outside of the historic downtown, which.
Great.
is where
Okay.
we're
I just
headed.
wanted,
I just wanted to make
thank
sure
you.
that that was part of the conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Julie?
I'd like to see it, a conditional use permit in the URA only for starters, to start off with URA only. Then if there's like some ginormous demand, we can look at expanding the geographical scope, but I think that is a logical place to start.
Okay, thank you. And I would favor conditional use permits. I definitely want to avoid use by right. And I would be in favor of all commercial zones. Okay,
Mayor,
Michelle,
I'm going to go with what Julie said. Thank you.
I'm sorry,
The URA.
just
commercial
okay, so
district.
URA only. And are you in favor of conditional use?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, great, thank you. Yeah, John?
I'd like to change mine to Julie's too. Thank you.
So you are in agreement with Julie?
Yep, the more I'm thinking about looking at these maps. Thank you.
Okay, so you want to be URA only for the zoning, is that correct? Okay, so we have basically 6 in favor of the conditional use permit with Judith wanting use by right. It gets a little fuzzier on commercial, or excuse me, on the zoning. We have 3 for the URA only, 3 for all commercial, and then 1 for all, well, commercial except for downtown, which is Natalie's.
If I could make a recommendation, it would be to work through some of the other items as well and see how that overlaps and see which then, if any, create an unreasonable restriction.
Okay, if that sounds reasonable, yeah, we can go on to the next, which is location restrictions. And we can come back and revisit this if that sounds agreeable to council. Yeah, John?
Is it statutory in the state that we restrict from schools, or is that our prerogative? Just remind me.
It's in the state.
It's in the
Yeah,
state.
from 1,000 foot.
Okay, so so the map that you provided that shows the state, the school districts, that is a state requirement, correct?
The 1,000 feet restriction,
Okay,
yes.
1,000 feet.
But you can reduce that
You can reduce it to
to
what?
0.
To 0.
Mhm.
Oh,
It's a state.
Sorry, Julie, could you use your microphone?
wait a second. Hold on just a second. So,
Okay, so it's currently they have a predetermined restriction as 1,000 foot. So we can use that, or we can reduce it to 500 to 0 to whatever. We just cannot go over that 1,000
okay,
feet.
so its maximum is 1,000.
Correct.
Okay. So I just wanted to figure out what was already built into state law with regard to these maps, okay? Which is that school thing. Is there anything that is built into state code with regard to parks, since you have this park map?
No.
No. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
And John, just going back to the memo, to clarify, state has predetermined a buffer of 1,000 feet from schools, licensed childcare facilities, and residential childcare facilities. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, we don't have any childcare facilities, so that's kind of a non-issue. Is that correct?
The only licensed ones in town are located at the schools.
Sorry, they're okay. They're part of the school.
John said, so as I understand it, that's the maximum distance from those entities, but we can make it 0.
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
And in the staff recommendations, it could be different, but they have 2 here. Leave the distance restriction at 1,000 feet, or B, set the distance restriction at 500 feet. So let's start down on this side here. Julie?
I'm fine going with the state recommended, if you will, or, outlying restrictions, and then we can always loosen it up and ease it up later, like Nancy had suggested earlier.
Okay, thank you. Natalie?
I agree with Julie.
Okay, 1,000 feet for Natalie, 1,000 feet for John. I was thinking of 500 on the grounds that that opens up a little bit, and I guess this plays into the idea that if we make things too restrictive, then maybe we begin to run afoul of the law. This would give some more options. I'm not real hard set on this. I'll put down 500, but I'm willing to certainly discuss this. Nancy?
I want, support 500 feet. It's more consistent with our other, restrictions in
Okay.
Manitou.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
Yeah, since this is pretty new, I'd like to start with a more restrictive 1,000 feet, and then we can always revise that later.
Okay, 1,000 feet. Very good. Michelle?
500 feet.
500 feet. Okay. So we've got 3 at 500 and 4 at 1,000. Okay. Why don't we push on to the third criteria and see where that gets? Third criteria is hours of operation. Let's see, the note to council in the memo is many other jurisdictions are restricting hours of operation between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Manitou Springs Code prohibits marijuana sales before 8 a.m. and after midnight, 7 days a week. So we have that. Michelle?
Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Judith?
Yeah, I could go with that, but I also would not be opposed to 7 days a week from 8 to 5. Wouldn't
Okay.
be opposed to 7 days a week from 8 to 5, but I'm okay with the restricting it to Monday through Saturday,
Okay.
8 to 5.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, I'm okay with that as well, but I also would not be opposed to 7 days a week.
Okay, so you're Monday through Saturday, not opposed to including Sunday and 8 to 5. Okay, thank you. And okay, John? Okay. Okay, Monday through Saturday then, 8 to 5. Okay, Natalie?
Ultimately open hours, but the 7 days a week, 8 to 5 is fine.
Okay, 7 days a week, and you'd say 8 to 5
8 to
also?
5.
Okay. Julie?
I think 8 to 5 is really restrictive because that's when most people have to be at work. So I don't know if we're just trying to have the businesses be kind of empty during the week. Or if they're supposed to cater to Medicaid. Is Medicaid going to cover this, Jeff? I can't imagine. No, Medicaid's not going to pay
Yeah,
for this. This is people who can afford it. Anyway, 5 PM seems kind of like early. I don't mind if the businesses want to stay open until 8 PM so they can accommodate people when they get home from work or they get home from college classes or something. So I'm fine with, 8 to 8.
Okay,
7 days a week.
7 days a week?
Sure.
You go ahead.
At the conference, there was more discussion on the time than anything else because a lot of questions were about, is 5 when you can take the last client, right? Is that when you accept the last client at 5? And then they have 4 to 6 hours that you're monitoring them. So there lots of gray area on the hours versus when someone is stable enough to go home.
I
So
think
just
you
wanted
would-
to throw
yeah.
that out.
I think you would basically have the authority to set that, like you need to be done operating, or you can basically have your last client. You could specify in your ordinance.
So we have to be clear as we're talking, if we're talking lights out at 5 o'clock and you better have all your customers out of the building by then? Or are we just saying you can take your last customer at 5 and then they can leave at midnight or however long it takes them to get over the trip? I don't know, 2 different things.
You're right. And I guess my sense as we were doing this, I was thinking you lights out at whatever the time was, 5 o'clock or something, but that may not be the intent. Maybe your last customer at 5.
I think that would be pretty impossible to regulate. I mean, how are we supposed to monitor what time the last customer came in? I mean, if you don't care about people wandering out, in and out of the building until midnight, then I don't, it doesn't really matter, but I don't see how we're supposed to regulate what time customers show up. That's weird.
Right. Right. Well, maybe, I think maybe we need to think about that a minute and then come back
Maybe,
to it.
maybe even a violation of HIPAA. They're just gonna start asking all these questions about your customers. What time did they get here? I don't know. I think we should just decide when our lights out and go with that number, that time of day or evening.
Okay. Well, again, and you know, I haven't voted yet. I was thinking of like 8 to 8 also, but I was thinking of 8 o'clock being last customer. But I think this adds a little bit of a nuance to it. And I'd be mainly in favor of Monday through Saturday, but I wouldn't be necessarily opposed to a Sunday. That's not a big point with me. So we'll tell you what, let's go on to the next question. Then we'll come back and we'll decide whether if the ending time is last customer, or if that's lights out. Is that? If only this were simple, huh?
I spaced it out.
Okay, so we're going to come back to hours of operation again, and sorry. Okay, please. Okay.
Oh, my question was if we could just get more information what other cities are doing in that regard, because I think it's a great point. And I certainly would like to think about it a bit more, but I think we've gotten some pretty good parameters at this point for you guys to go with. That's my thought on it. Because you're going to have to come back with us with the draft ordinance. Because there's some other thing, like I like a couple of things that Parker did that I think should be included in this as well. So I don't want to go through one by one every option tonight necessarily.
Okay. Well,
There's only one more option.
let's
But
let's power through that last question and then see how close we are to being able to provide direction to staff. A number of licensed facilities. And of course, with marijuana, we have 2 facilities. Nancy, I think you hit it at, you suggested maybe 3 or 4. And then just a comment in the memo, the location restrictions may naturally limit the number of properties available to be licensed as natural medicine businesses. And the city must not inadvertently ban licensed facilities. I'm sorry, Natalie, please.
Just a clarifying question. Again, is it number of facilities or number of licenses, since there could be 4 licenses working out of one facility?
Well, no, so that would be the facilities are different than the facilitators. So the licensed individuals who are basically administering the dose and all that, they're separate. And then you have I think we're talking more just, you can't really regulate those.
Okay.
You have to regulate how many facilities.
Okay, so
And-
we could have, so, okay, I gotcha. So, yeah, there's one license, but there could be 6 people operating under that license.
Right.
Think of it as a building.
Gotcha.
instead of a facility.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I also, yeah, so I haven't, there's nothing in the statute of regulations, I believe, about numeric limits. Do you recall seeing that? I don't think there is anything. So I don't think you per se can't do that, but I think you would have to basically, you couldn't say 4 total, whatever they are. Probably gonna have to do numeric limits for each kind. So, 2
Right.
cultivation, 3 cultivation, 3 healing center, whatever that would be. I don't think you could just say, well, if there's 4 healing centers, you can't do a cultivation facility, because
Okay.
that's gonna be a ban. I think that could be a problem.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That's helpful.
I hope you guys don't mind me jumping in, because I hope if you disagree or think something's not accurate, let me know. So this is your presentation.
Jeff, what you're suggesting is all 4 of those criterias, we've got to come up with a number if we're going to do a numeric
Yeah.
location.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And to Jeff's point, there really isn't anything guiding this part of the discussion other than that's what was allowed for marijuana here. So it could be decided that there's enough differences in the regulations that that doesn't really apply to these types of businesses.
Okay, thank you. With that in mind, should we start down? Julie, do you?
No, don't start with me. Thanks.
This feels super arbitrary. I'm just going to say 2 of each.
Okay, 2 of each. So we'd have 4 flavors, maximum 2 of each.
Yeah, it's super arbitrary. I have nothing to base this on.
Okay. John? Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, Nancy?
Yeah, it is definitely throwing a dart on this one, but my inclination would say 2 to 3 of the wellness center where their facilitated care is, and then no more than one of the other, no more than one each, because we can't exclude any of them, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So-
Yeah, like I said, I think you're gonna probably be seeing more of a demand for the healing centers than you are the other facilities. but-
Yeah, yeah,
Because they're gonna be more like an office setting. They're easier to set up, I would
Yeah.
assume.
so I would say maybe 3 wellness or healing centers and one each of the other 3.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
We were close. I was gonna go with no greater than 4 of the healing centers and 1 each of the others.
Okay, 4 max on the healing, on the, what do you call it, wellness or healing?
They're called healing centers.
Okay, healing centers, okay. And then you were thinking, and then Judith, you were saying 1 of each.
One each of the others, the cultivating and the research. And just to throw in, I would like to see that screening requirement that is in the Parker ordinance. They have a screening requirement on visual what.
Okay, all right, thank you. Michelle?
4 healing centers, 1 of each.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
4
4 max of
and then
healing.
1 of each.
Okay,
of the
so
other
same,
3.
same as Judith then. Okay, and since I pulled this side of the table here, I mean, we were just, John and Natalie, you were saying 2 of each. You want to stick with that or do you want to? Okay,
I'm
Natalie.
comfortable adjusting to the 4 healing centers and 1 of each.
Okay, so you'd be, okay. So- Okay, so, well, it looks like we're coalescing towards a maximum of 4 healing centers and 1 each of the other 3 kinds. Yeah, and I can do that. I don't have a hard sense of this either way. My understanding is, I guess, Elena, I believe we haven't had anybody show any interest in this yet come to the city. I mean, it's earlier. Chelsea?
I've received 1 inquiry in the planning department for a grow operation. However, given that we didn't have any regulations, they were gonna kind of wait and see what we did.
Okay, but so far nobody's been breaking down the door, so.
No.
Okay, and this will be a little bit different. I mean, there's going to be a lot of different economic drivers on this, so it'll be different than the marijuana. Okay. So we've looked at 4 criteria and we need to retune this a little bit. Nancy?
I just wanted to say that I also like in the Parker thing, the local penalties for individuals who maintain personal cultivation more than 12 by 12. Not that we'd ever know that, but in the event it gets crazy, we have an opportunity to do something about it.
Okay, okay. Oh, and also Judith, you had called for this, if you favor the screening requirement. Okay, and Nancy, you're nodding your head too, so I gather you're in favor of screening. Michelle, you're for screening? Same way, John, you're up for it? Natalie?
I agree,
I don't know what the screening requirement means.
covering the
It's
windows.
just.
It prevents the view of the interior from any exterior public or
Or like
semi-public.
mini blinds or something?
Right.
It's,
Right.
you have to cover your window?
Yeah.
Okay.
Privacy, I'm okay with it. It's not a big deal to me. Okay. Okay. So council in general, I think we're fairly, on some things we have quite a bit of commonality. I think sounds like a maximum of 4 healing centers with 1 each of the others and required screening. Seems like we're all accepting of that. Judith, you're the only one who is not looking for a conditional use permit.
I'm fine with
Yep.
CUP.
You'd be okay with CUP? Okay. My personal thought is it's a little bit more restrictive, but it does go through a process that we've accepted in the community, and it has to go through administrative phase. It goes through a public hearing phase, and with planning commission and council. So I think that's a conservative approach as we get into this kind of brave new world. So if we did that, so the CUP, whether it's, okay, the commercial zone is where we have some differences of opinion, the distance and the hours. And by and large, it looks like most of us would be okay with 7 days a week, 8 to 5. But again, we should come back and figure out whether we mean it's last customer or lights out. And I think we don't need to solve all this tonight, but we need to be able to give you some direction. Is that good? Jeff, is that also, does that sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, I mean, I just need to be able to put stuff in the ordinance so you guys can get generally what you're looking for. So, I mean, I guess not that, if a trip lasts 4 to 6 hours and you basically say lights out at 5, people are not gonna be able to get in there until like at the latest, like 11 a.m. just to be safe. Or you have people leaving who are still high. So, I mean, to me, I mean, just your call, but it seems like an 8 to 8 makes a lot more sense if it's gonna be lights out.
And I was thinking 8 to 8 too. And for that reason, and also, people who are working may not be able to get off. And if it was 7 days a week, I guess I'd be okay with that.
And you can change those hours. Like those are not going to be grandfathered. Those will be, it's not working. You can shorten it.
Okay,
8
8 to 8, okay.
7 days a week.
Well, I'm thinking here for the purpose of getting a draft, we may be fairly close.
We have no.
We haven't discussed the park restriction. Well, let's discuss the park restriction. And since you asked, John, we're going to start with you. No, you get what you asked for. I'm sorry. No, okay, John, parks. 500 feet from parks. Okay.
A point of clarification, I apologize for interrupting. Are we looking for properties that are zoned park or that are developed with parks? Sold. Thank you.
Zoned as park. Okay, so now we're talking zoned as park. John, you want a 500 foot restriction. Natalie?
I don't know on this one.
We'll come back to you. Julie?
No restriction on parks.
Okay, thank you. Nancy?
No restrictions on parks.
Judith?
Is Higginbotham Flats zoned for parking?
Not parking,
I'm
sorry.
park- as a
So
park.
there are 2 parcels that are zoned parks up in here. Yeah, at Higginbotham Flats.
Okay. Well, I'm in favor of not limiting it to the URA, but limiting it to all zone districts that you're saying is not including the downtown core, but I would go with 1,000 feet to start with.
And I'm sorry, Judith, do you want a 1,000 foot restriction around parks? Okay. Michelle?
1,000 feet.
1,000 feet, okay. And that makes sense, I guess. And I would say, and I'm gonna say no restrictions relative to parks for myself. I think if we put too many distance restrictions on there, we're gonna end up at a place where people can't realistically get a license. Okay, that takes us back to Natalie.
Yeah, I guess 500 feet.
How much?
500 feet.
Okay. Okay, so we're all over the board on that. We've got 2 at 500, 2 at 1,000, and 3 for none. So we've got,
I'm willing to change to 500. I'm willing to go there. So just in the interest of getting something started
okay,
here,
so you'll go to 500.
getting home before
And
midnight.
I'm sorry, Julie, did you say 500?
I'm willing to go to 500, yeah.
500 feet is good.
Okay, so now we've got 5 at 500. Nancy and I are the 2 for none. I'm not real striding on that. I guess my concern is that it's are we taking the footprint of available sites out such that we'd be accused of restricting this or?
Don't we have the whole URA? Where's there any parks over there? I mean, you've got the baseball field
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Fields Park.
Beckers.
Well, John, what if we use this formula, have staff draw all the little circles and see what's available? And then we can make adjustments the next time.
Could
You know,
we,
but if what we
could we
pick
pull up the
has
parks?
nothing, then we're in trouble. And if we have, you know, some zones with some reasonable stuff with what we picked, then maybe we're good to go, is my suggestion, John.
yeah, I mean, I think we've got some good ideas here and we could get a first draft going and fine tune it as we go. And we certainly, things like it's 5 PM or 8 PM is that last customer, is that lights out? We need to get a little more information on, I think. I guess, council, if, well, okay, let me just finish here.
Just a
Nancy.
quick question. Does the
Well, go
ball,
ahead, ask your question.
I'm sorry, does the ball field count as a school, or is it only the buildings for the school that count?
State regulation says that it's only properties that are developed with the school building and not just owned by the school. The ball field is not zoned park either. So that actually wouldn't meet either of the buffer requirements, either from schools or from parks. No, and actually that is another inaccuracy on this map. It's zoned commercial.
It does have a small building on it, but I guess that's not an issue here. It's a small building on that property that they serve hot dogs out of and stuff. So there's a building there.
I-
So you know.
I don't think that the state legislature considered that. And so,
So I missed the
we could get some
question.
clarity. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd get clarity on that because there's a building there. So I don't know. Just
Yeah.
check that out.
I think they meant an actual school building, but
I have a quick question too. Do we need to consider what building a healing center could go into? Cause like in the URA, I'm not sure there's, like you're not going to put a healing center in Lulu's where Lulu's, I mean, that seems a little odd. Like, do we have to look at like Dr. Sharp's office
No.
or the 7-Eleven? It doesn't matter.
yeah, I don't think you have to take a look at like, well, what businesses here, what would be compatible, what not. If there's locations and spaces where they can get to it and they can do at least deal with somebody, that's
Enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, council, I'm wondering if it would be okay that we direct staff to go ahead with an ordinance, the idea that we'd be using we'd be requiring a conditional use permit, go through the process as they recommended, that it would be commercial, but we would still have to figure out whether it's all commercial, the URA only, or commercial, but not downtown. We have to come up with a distance. Quick math is our average is about 785 feet. So maybe 750 feet is a compromise on it. That can be decided later. And I'm not personally, I don't care a whole lot. I just, I'm a little concerned that we want to have some space available for business that might want to do this. And then we have the hours. And other than that, I think we're getting fairly close. If somebody's got a better idea, this is a good time to say something. Okay, so is that enough direction?
Yeah, I think
Realize
we're good to start a draft and bring it back.
First
Yeah.
draft and Jeff, we're not creating too many problems. Okay, so let's,
No, I mean, I think we just want to take a look at that map finally and just see, what you got, but seems
Right.
reasonable.
if we get that additional information and the questions that we need to have asked or answered. But I think we've got enough direction now to push forward.
Thank you all for the direction and the great conversation. This was very enlightening and I think it will help us craft an ordinance. So
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, so next item here is, thank you very much. Second reading and public hearing for ordinance number 0824, an ordinance amending Title 10 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code by the addition of a new chapter 10.26 to establish an automated vehicle identification system. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, passed it on first reading. Denise, I believe nothing has changed on this?
No, nothing has changed.
But I do have a 45-minute presentation.
No, absolutely not. We're done. We, public
Okay.
hearing, motion second, we're done. No.
Okay, so
I actually do have two minor suggested tweaks when I read it again. We want to do a couple of we want to
please,
just change two. Can I just give that to you really quickly for the record?
Please.
10.26.020B5, we need to change the reference to from chapter to section. It's just totally minor. And then in 10.26.060 subsection C, appeals should go to the Manitou Springs Municipal Court, not to the El Paso County Court.
okay, good point. Okay,
Just
so
you can do both. You
Mr.
can do
Mayor?
both, but it makes more sense, I think, based on what we're going to end up doing to have it come here.
okay, right, John?
I move approval, but I would
Oh,
like,
sorry, a public hearing.
oh, I'm sorry.
So Ted, I don't know that we're going to have a long public hearing. So with that, I will open the public hearing. Anyone who would like to speak to this is welcome to do so. I received one request to speak. It was from Joan Stang. She was here earlier today. And this was to a specific item, so this will be the appropriate time for her to speak. And she's not here, but she did circle the box down below that said she's for the issue. So I guess that'll be the extent of Joan's comments for tonight. Do we have anyone else who wants to speak to this? If not, the public hearing is closed. Mr. Shada?
Yes, I move approval with all of the items that the city attorney wants added. And I would like to propose we add a 6th Street to 102650. Number 6, which would be US 24 highway. And I understand that that doesn't give us automatic approval to use it on the highway because I believe the state statute says we have to notify and cooperate with
That's
the
right.
highway department. But it seems like to me, we ought to at least allow us, if the chief wants to do his extended force thing on US 24. Yeah. Thank you. So that would be my proposal. We add an item 6
So that is the motion.
I'll
as a
second
part
that.
of the motion.
Okay, so it's the
Do I-
original ordinance plus
Jeff,
modifications recommended by Jeff Parker, plus adding Highway 24.
that's right.
Okay.
US
And I
24
second that.
bypass.
Okay, and then second,
No, we can just, I think we can just say it's only in our municipal limits. Okay, so we don't have to say except Peyton. I mean, we can only do it within our municipal limits, so.
and Natalie, that was a second by you. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, council, let's vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you very much. The chief can start ordering his stuff. Okay, great. That takes us to receive or act on council correspondence. Anybody have anything on council? I guess not. Let's go to the city administrator's report. Denise?
Just a quick note, you can pick up your budget book on Friday after 3 o'clock. So, and if you want me to deliver it to you, just send me an email and I'll get it delivered to you after 5 o'clock. So
At the clerk.
at the city clerk's office.
Okay,
So it
thank
will
you.
be available on Friday at 3 o'clock. And then a reminder, October 3rd, the Higginbotham Master Plan Community Meeting is being held here from 6 to 8.
Great, thank you. And I forgot to mention, next week, October the 8th, we will not have a council meeting. That would normally be a work session, and instead we'll have all day on Saturday, the 12th. And Denise, does that start at 8?
8:30 is breakfast and it starts at 9 a.m.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Okay, I'll seek a motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. See if we can catch anything after the. Hey, thanks. It was a lot of work, but we got some stuff.